So I'm going to go ahead and share. I don't have slides. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So I want to show you a couple of things. The main thing I want to talk about is differentiation in instruction. So I use Edulastic mainly as my primary assessment tool. And so what I want to show you is how I use Edulastic to modify assessments. And we'll just start with the real basic level. For example, in many classes, most of us have students with IEPs who need modified assessments in order to be successful. So one of the challenges with that is always, well, now I got to make 2 tests. Well, Edulastic actually kind of makes it simple. So let me show you something. I, for example, have this assessment, Physics Quiz 3, Newton's Laws of Motion. It's 23 questions, and I mean, I'll just go ahead and preview. You can see it's not a super high-level quiz. It's a pretty basic assessment talking about Newton's Laws of Motion. Well, Edulastic allows you to create a new version of this quiz. You'll notice it looks the same except for that little star there. First benefit to that, by the way, students all think they're taking the same test. So you don't have let me give you a different colored test so everyone knows you're different type of a thing. But if you notice, when you look at the questions, they're different. They're the same questions, but the way they're written, they've got fewer choices. I've emphasized key points. The net force is 0. Removed unnecessary words and removed answer choices, so that you can see that the assessment is modified for someone who may have a difficulty with reading. And this is really easy to do. So let's just take this quiz, for example, and let's actually, do I have another one that I want to do? No, let's do this one. So let's say I want to take this assessment here, and I want to create a new version of it. So all I do is hit create new version. And it's going to give you 2 options. The first option is new version with original set of questions. Now, if you select that option, if you make a change on the new one, you're going to make a change on the old one. You don't want that. You want new versions of every question. So what will happen is every question gets copied and inserted into a new assessment. You can also do this for students who are gifted or students who have other specific needs. So what will happen is, boom, new version of the assessment, and all of the questions have been copied exactly as they were written. Now, all we have to do is go through and modify the questions. So I'll just pick this question here. I'll hit edit. There we go, brand new version. So I might say, all right, in this particular case, I'm going to remove the distractor from my matching question. And maybe I want to modify the wording here. An object at rest stays at rest. An object in motion stays in motion. And maybe I want to remove the rest of the add-on. While it might be correct and scientifically accurate, it might be more than that specific student is able to read. So I then modify these things. When I'm done, you can have a couple options. What I like to do when I modify a question is come down here to the tags, and I actually like to write modified, so that I know that I've tagged this question as a modified question. And then save and proceed. And you can do the same thing as you go down every single question in the quiz. So this is really helpful because, like I said, it saves you time. I'm able to modify, this is a pretty long assessment, and I'm able to modify it in probably 5 to 8 minutes. One good point that was just brought up is that if you are doing a common assessment and you create a new version, you won't be able to aggregate that data together because technically they are separate questions. So that is something to keep in mind. Especially if you do standards-based grading, you'll have to run 2 reports and it will show up separately. But it is a really, really quick way to meet those students' IEP needs without giving yourself a million hours of extra work. So that's one thing. I do keep pretty much separate versions of every one of these. And again, I can modify them as needed. Something else that's really cool is that you can modify an assessment as you assign it. So let me give you an example. I recently gave this quiz, Physical Properties of Matter. And part of the standard in Arizona where I teach is density. And it does involve calculation of density. So for example, one of the modifications is that they get the formulas. The other students without modifications don't always get the formulas. In this case, they get the formulas. So I'll include that in there, but they still have to type the answer. Some students, depending on their level and what their IEP says, have a specific requirement that they also are allowed to use a calculator. So what I might do is hit assign. And I'm not going to pull up student needs to mention confidentiality, but you could select individual students and say, little Johnny and little Susie, I'm going to pick just you 2. And I'll come down here and I'll say, okay, those 2 students, you're going to get a calculator that's going to pop up that others won't have. Another option that you have is to evaluate. So the evaluation method for partial credit, these are questions like your multiple answer questions, your drag and drop questions, other tech enhanced items. So one option that you can give all or nothing, if you want to make it, that's usually what state testing is. Partial credit gives them some credit for right answers and takes away credit if they give a wrong answer. And if they have a modified assessment scale, you can also say, we're not going to penalize them for incorrect selections. So that gives you some flexibility in how you assign it to them, what tools they have access to, and how it specifically is scored. Now, multiple choice questions, they're either right or wrong, for example. But if it's one that's not that way, you can adjust it. All right. So let me also now, are there any questions, first of all, on modification? Because I want to go into a couple of different question types that I use, but I want to make sure that I answer if there's any questions. It doesn't look like there are that I saw, so I'm going to go ahead and move on. If you do, just drop them in the chat and I'll answer them later. So I want to go through a couple of, I'm teaching chemistry right now, so there's a lot of chemistry assessments because it's, front of my brain. So I want to show you a couple of different question types I use. So this is a multiple selection question, select all that apply. So the question here wants to know, what do sulfur, phosphorus, and chlorine all have in common? Students have a periodic table, and the assessment is asking if they are basically, are they able to use the periodic table correctly? And one thing that I just noticed is I don't have a periodic table in front of me. So please forgive me if I'm wrong here, but I believe sulfur, phosphorus, and chlorine are all nonmetals. Oh, I have to look up. I have to pull up a periodic table, or I'm just gonna be very wrong. Hold on, I can't be wrong. Periodic table. Okay. So we've got sulfur, chlorine, and what was the other one? Sulfur, phosphorus, and chlorine. So sulfur, phosphorus, and chlorine. Thanks for indulging me, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate you. Those are all non-metals. They're all in period 3. So those would be the 2 correct answers for that. Thanks again. I appreciate your time. Now, one of the things with that modification I told you earlier is this would be the full correct answer. If you pick all or nothing, they're either going to get all the points for these 2. If they pick anything else, it's completely wrong. So one of the things, if you have assigned partial credit, if a student were to do this, they'd get half credit because they'd get +2 - 1. So they'd get 1 out of 2. They'd get half the points. If you have them not penalizing for correct answers, they would get all the points because they picked the right answers, and then they don't get a penalty for picking a wrong answer. Again, it just depends on how you want to assess those specific students. Another example of some question types, these are drag or drops. Another one of these standards here in Arizona that we assess on, and it is a 2004 standard, so we're not going to go to new standards for 2 more years, so they are a little bit lower level, but that's okay, they're still good. This one is to classify elements, compounds, and mixtures. So we have examples of elements, compounds, and mixtures. Students just drag them to whatever they think the correct answer is. And there you go. This is another example of a question where partial credit can be given. Now, one tool you do have available, it wouldn't make sense in this particular question, but you can allow these drag and drop values to be used multiple times. That can be used in a couple of different ways, but that's also an option available for you. Over here is an example. We have gene pairs and genotypes. So the question is asking them to classify them according to if it's going to be a dominant phenotype or a recessive phenotype. And again, they just would have to drag and drop. I'm doing this really fast, so I really hope I'm right. Otherwise, it will be memorialized forever on YouTube. So that's another example of the classification question. I find that one to be really, really useful in science. Another one that's quite useful and can be quite useful is the question with units. So let me go ahead and come to this question right here. I am actually going to preview it. So this question is a net force question. 3,800 newtons up, 1,200 newtons down should give us 2,600 down, or up, excuse me, 2,600 newtons up to the net force. But that then forces them to pick the correct unit in order to get the answer correct. So this is another example of a specific question type. I know that I'm big on, you have to use correct units because numbers don't mean anything without units. So that's a really useful question type as well. One last thing. So in my school, we use standards-based assessments and standards-based grading. And part of our standards-based grading program is that students have to be allowed to reassess a standard, which actually makes sense. We all learn at different paces. So however quick a student learns something, that's great. They should be allowed to show their knowledge. Edulastic allows us to do that really fast. So let me give you an example. I'm going to create an assessment. Let's just say I want to reassessment, and then we're just going to pretend that I know how to spell reassessment for chemistry, strand 5, concept 1, PO5. Let's just pick one. So a couple of things you can do. A lot of times it's the easiest way to do this is copycat questions. I want to ask the same thing, but I want to ask it a different way so that they can't just memorize the answer. So I might go, all right, grade 8, science, standard set, Arizona science. I'll go to the standard, strand 1, concept 5, PO5, done. Collections. Now, if you want to use collections or questions that you've written before, great idea to select private library. Now you can see your previous questions. These are questions I've already asked before. They're already on assessments. So I might just go, all right, let's just do identify each mixture as being homogeneous or heterogeneous. I'll look at it, go, okay, I'm going to use this question again. I just want to change the items that I pick. Duplicate the question. All right, so instead of milk, how about I do iced tea with ice, which would be heterogeneous. Trail mix. Instead, let me put, I don't know, what am I put, just make sure, what am I put, gravel. Okay. Instead of pizza, what am I put, a salad with cucumbers, or croutons, or cheese, whatever. Salad with something. Instead of toothpaste, what am I put, mouthwash. Instead of air, why don't I put lemonade? Instead of oatmeal, why don't I put cereal with milk? And instead of pasta salad, why don't I put Gatorade? Save and proceed. Now there you go. The student is now able to reassess. I'm checking and testing the same skill, but I've changed the question up. So now it's not just can I memorize the order of the answers, now it's can I actually demonstrate my learning. And that was simple. That took all of 2 minutes. And that was a more complicated question. This works really well because you can pull questions you've asked and make sure you're asking the same way, asking the same style, but still testing it a little bit differently. And with that, I will ask if there are any questions.
There was one question that came through asking if is Arizona doing NGSS?
Arizona is not doing NGSS. They were a partner state with that, but then things happened in the state. We actually just rolled out new standards that have taken effect this year. However, the state is still assessing 4th grade and 8th grade on the old 2004 standards for the next 2 years. So every district's doing something different. My district has decided that 4th and 8th grade will still be teaching the old standards while they're being assessed. And then all the other grade levels have switched over to those new standards, but there is not, it's not NGSS, unfortunately.
Great.
There's a lot of crossover, but it's not the same.
And then Alvin has another question. It's how do we differentiate great questions in the question bank?
I'm not sure I understand the question. So one of the, well, actually, I think I do. So one of the things you can do when you look in the question bank, and again, you don't have to use your own questions either. Let's just go to science, and I'm going to pick grade 8. And let's just say I want to pick, I don't know. Let's just do systematic organization of the periodic table. So what I might do here is go down and just, these are all my questions, but why don't I actually look at public library, see what else is in there. Okay, so this is someone else. I might look and go for, oh, one other thing, by the way, you can also filter out by question type. So let's just say I wanted a classification question. No, there's none available. And grade 8 science. Let's just say I wanted a different one. A multiple select. No, that won't work either. Multiple choice. Come on. There we go. So let's just say I want to look at this question right here. How did the work of Gregor Mendel change scientific explanation? This one looks like it was released by AZ Merritt. Interesting. So I might take this question, duplicate. Oh, sorry. Okay, so once I've got this question, that's where I can go, okay, so I'm looking at this question. A is the right answer. D is really wordy and might confuse the student, especially if the nature of their disability is reading. So I might just click here and delete that question. if there's any type of visual impairment or they need help drawing attention to key points, I might bold or underline the word that I'm looking for. And I might also change the scientific explanation. So I might change our understanding. Because that's, again, the phrasing is just a little bit easier to understand. I might change the words to numbers if possible. They might not understand what miniature means, so I might change it to smaller. And skip a generation. I might remove that. Again, it depends on what you're asking and how you want to make sure you ask it, but that's a simpler version of the same question. And it still tests the same information. It's still checking that same information that you maybe didn't check before, or not didn't check before, but that it's still checking this. It's still checking to make sure that they understand the information without making the test, without putting the test in their way.